We had our own Holly Beers spoke to us last week and brought a passage to light that I think a lot of us weren't very familiar with. And I know the last time I preached, which was back in October, I had to read the passage like 20 times before I could mine the insights out of them. But this one that I've got this morning practically preaches itself. It's a story that many of us are familiar with. I find it a little bit suspicious that 40 of our guys are away when I'm preaching on David and Bathsheba, but we're just going to trust that John didn't know that was coming up on the calendar. But this story, really, even if you don't even read the Bible, many of us have heard of or know the story of David and Bathsheba. So the challenge this morning is not to mine the insights out of the passage. They're there. The challenge this morning is to look at this passage with fresh eyes and to do what Holly encouraged us last week, to see how the passage speaks to us where we sit this morning. And I know that I've had a really good time in this word this last week and just hearing how the passage has spoken to me. So in your program, which is now reduced to basically a long sheet of paper, you will see the first 5 verses of 2 Samuel 11, which is the story. But if you do have your iPhone and you have the Bible app, you are welcome to turn to 2 Samuel 11. As well as if you have an actual Bible, you can turn there as well. It's in the Old Testament, about in the middle, just before the Kings. You'll find 1st and 2nd Samuel. And this is the story of David and Bathsheba. So let me go ahead and just read the first 5 verses. In the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. One evening, David got up from his bed and walked around on the roof of the palace. From the roof, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. And so David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, "Isn't this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" Then David completely ignored him and sent messengers to get her. She came to him. That part isn't in the passage, but David sent messengers to get her. She came to him and he slept with her. She had purified herself from her uncleanness. Then she went back home, and the woman conceived and sent word to David saying, "I am pregnant." So I want to just look at this passage, unpack it a little bit. We notice right away on verse 1, that David is somewhere he's not supposed to be. It was the time when kings go off to war, and David was home. He sent Joab out with the king's army. And so often when it comes to temptation, we are where we're not supposed to be. And that's where David was. And then the second part of the passage that shows that he was where he wasn't supposed to be is that it was evening. This was a time when typically in that culture, many people would bathe to prepare for the evening meal. And they did that on their roofs. This was not unusual because they would collect the rainwater and then they would bathe on their roofs. Now, what I found out when I was in Jerusalem, actually I went on a study tour many, many years ago when I was at Fuller Seminary. And I remember the day that we went and we sort of looked at where David's palace was. Through excavations, they've been able to show where it was. And Jerusalem is a city on a hill, and the king's palace was always built at the top so that he could walk out and look down on his kingdom. And so when we were there that day, we imagined the story. Of course, David, when he came out on his roof, he could see all the roofs of everybody beneath him. And so when you think about that, it's evening, it's a time when people are bathing, and David goes outside. Now, I preface this story that way because I think so often we have either seen a movie Or we have this idea that Bathsheba was kind of doing a flash dance number on her roof. Now, some of you are a little too young to even know what flash dance is, but go back to the 80s. It was a movie where Jennifer Beals does this sort of, the water comes down. It's a very sensual, and we imagine that Bathsheba is doing something like that. But the truth is, Scripture is silent about that. We don't know how modest or immodest she was being, but we do know that her husband was part of the king's army and he was away. So it's very likely that she assumed that David was away as well, because David was the king and he was supposed to be with his army. So whatever is going on in Uriah's mind, it's doubtful that she's thinking that she is being watched as she bathes in the evening. And from his highest roof, David walks outside and sees her. Now, I just want to stop right there in the story. There isn't a person in this auditorium who hasn't been where David was at that moment. And what we're going to see in this story is there are so many choices that we can make when we're heading down the road to temptation. And we just watch David as he walks right into it. So he's out on his roof, he sees this beautiful woman, and then he sends someone to find out about her. He finds out, and by question, I love the way the servant said, well, isn't this Bathsheba, like the wife of one of your soldiers? And you don't even hear, David does not even respond to that. But you will notice in the next 3 verses, things move fast. And don't they always move fast when we're being tempted? See, we don't want to think during those times. It's kind of like la 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 la. We're headed. We're going. We know where we're going, right? And that's exactly the language of the passage. I mean, you can just see he sent for her. She came to him, and then he slept with her. And then the only time we hear from Bathsheba is a message that comes back to the palace. And you notice that it doesn't even say Bathsheba. Her name isn't even used. This was an act of lust on David's part. The woman sent word back to the palace saying to David, I am pregnant. Okay, so here we have David caught. He's in the midst of his sin, and he has a choice to come clean at that moment. He could confess. But no, David does what so many of us do when we're caught, and that is we immediately think of what we can do to hide what we've done. And David comes up with a great plan. He brings Uriah back. And if you keep looking in the story, if you have the Bible in front of you, I didn't print out all the verses, but please read it at home. And what you notice is that after that, he has Uriah brought home, and he thinks, okay, I've taken care of it. Uriah's going to go. He's going to sleep with his wife, and then the fact that she's pregnant, everyone's going to think it's Uriah's baby. But unfortunately for David, Uriah is too good of a guy to do that. And so David finds out that instead of going to be with his wife and enjoying the night, he sleeps with the servants at David's palace. Well, now David's in trouble. And once again, it's another opportunity for him to come clean. But instead, he brings Uriah back to the palace. And he says in verse 10 and 11, haven't you just come from a distance? Why didn't you go home? And what's so interesting is Uriah's response is a front to David. This is what Uriah says in verse 11. The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents. And my master Joab and my Lord's men are camped in the open fields. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and lie with my wife? As surely as you live, I will not do such a thing. Let's just put ourselves in David's position at that moment. Can you imagine? This isn't even Uriah the Jew, Uriah the God-fearing Jew. This is Uriah the Hittite saying these things. He's being a better man than the man after God's own heart. Well, once again, it's another opportunity for David to come clean. So what does he do? oh gosh, now I'm going to have to go in a little deeper. And don't we do that? And so he invites Uriah to the palace, and he gives him a big meal, and he gives him lots to drink, with emphasis on the drink. And Uriah actually gets drunk, and he thinks surely now he's going to go home and be with his wife. But no, Uriah doesn't do it. He's too good of a guy. So now David has a problem. He can either come clean or go even further. And unfortunately for David, he chooses the latter. And he comes up with a plan, and he tells Joab to put Uriah on the front lines where the fighting is the most dangerous. And so Joab gets the message, puts Uriah on the front line, and Uriah is killed. And he sends word back to David. It's really interesting if you read the passage. He has this whole big report. Tell him the whole report. And by the way, tell him Uriah the Hittite is dead. I don't know how many of you have heard of or have watched Scandal, but it just sort of reminds me of Olivia Pope. It's been handled, right? But here's the thing. It hasn't been handled because it happened. And the only way what's happened becomes handled is when we come clean and go to God. He can handle it. But if we're hiding, it's not handled. It festers, and some of you live with that festering. And maybe some of you are here in this service today living with that festering. And you're saying, why did I come to church today? We hide, and we think we've taken care of it. David thought he had taken care of it, and technically he had. Nobody knew. Nobody knew, and he wasn't really directly involved with Uriah's death. He just orchestrated it so it could happen. But if you look at the last verse of 2 Samuel 11, you see these words. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. So now, oh, uncomfortable audience, let's move to the takeaway of these verses. Because I know that for all of us, this is a passage that really touches close to home. It's not something we usually verbalize or talk about, and there's probably a whole lot of unspoken stuff happening here today. But what I want to invite you to do is let God into that place where you sit today, because that's where he wants to be. He knows anyway, and he wants to be. So 3 things that I have, and you'll see these in your notes, and I actually left a blank so you could fill it in. That would mean that you would have to listen to the sermon. The farther you go, the more difficult it is. Isn't that true? What we notice in this passage is that David had many, many points when he could have turned, and it would have been a lot easier. He could have gone out on that roof and said, oh my gosh, she's so hot. I'm going to walk away. I'm going to walk away because she's married. That would have been the least painful turn in this passage. And I want to tell you something. I know that when we get to heaven and we talk to David, he's going to go, I wish I had turned away on that roof because of the fallout that happened afterwards. Now, some of you who are newer to the church don't know that I was single for actually a long time before I married the hunk of the man that I'm married to now. I didn't marry him until I was 49 years old. That's when I got married for the very first time. I know some of you Westmont students have heard about the ring by spring. I was actually ring by retirement, and I barely snuck in under 50. And I really got an amazing prize. But for all those years of singleness, you can imagine that there were many points along the way where I identified with this passage. And the harder part about it was that I was single. And a lot of times it was with guys who were married. And most of the time in the situations I was in, because I was speaking all over the place, the guy was a good guy. And he wanted to be faithful to his wife. And so that created a cautiousness to all the friendships that I was in, nearly all of them. But there was one time, and this was right after, some of you will remember way back when Columbine happened, when that tragedy happened at the high school. It was the first one to happen, actually. And I actually spoke in Colorado at Frontier Ranch at a big youth conference. And I was going to be the speaker of the conference, and there was this musician, great looking guy. And he was very charismatic and, almost as cute as Jerry. And I could just, how it starts. You just start. I noticed him, and I didn't know that he was married at first, and then I kind of found out he was married. But he was very nice to me. There was all kinds of chemistry, and we were both staying in the same area. We had separate rooms, of course, but there was like an open area, and so it was very natural where we could have spent lots of time together. And at first, we started to talk, and of course, he seemed taken with all my thoughts. When he was amazed that I wasn't married. You know how it goes. And so I just remember this little voice going on in the back of my mind, but you just want to quiet that voice. Have you ever been there? Shh, no, because my soul was hungry for this. I was single. I longed to be married. And here was this guy, attractive, paying attention to me. And it began to move towards more conversations. And after a while, I kind of had the sense, unlike in other situations, that he was not as careful as others had been. I just kind of had that sense. And you know what that feels like. And so I can remember the moment that I decided I've got to stay away. This is getting to a place where I just know, this isn't going well. And so I did. It was really hard. It was hard for me. And a couple years later, I talked to the guy who had me speak at camp, and he knew him. And I said, hey, whatever happened to, and I said his name. And his eyes dropped to the floor, and he said, oh, it's really sad. He had an affair, and he's now divorced from his wife, and he's out of the ministry. And you know what I realized at that moment? See, it wasn't me he wanted. It was someone other than the woman he had. And so often that is the case with temptation. See, when the other woman becomes your woman, the allure is different, isn't it? And that should tell us something. What it should tell us is, and I have this quote up on the screen, that the power is in the wanting, not in the thing that you want. And see, we get confused. We think, oh my gosh, I must have married the wrong person. This is the person and we forget that the power is in the wanting and not in the thing you want. And if you keep that in front of you, it's going to spare you a lot of difficulty in your life. Because the farther you go down that road, the more difficult it is. And some of you know that. And that's what happened to David. Second takeaway. The more you hide, the deeper the lie. See, whenever we've done something wrong, that is our first impulse. It's just true about all of us. Some of us even come to church and hide because we don't want anybody else to know what we're thinking, what we've done, what we're thinking about doing. And the fact is that maybe if you came here today and you're hiding, you may feel like God is being mean to you right now. You tricked me. Why did I come to church today? The truth is that God loved you, and that's why he brought you to church today, because he wants more for your life. He doesn't want sin and hurt and hiding in your life. He wants health and freedom and life. And the fact is, with adultery, as with all bad decisions that we make, there is fallout. And some of you know that fallout. You're living in that fallout. And even if you divorce the person you're with and end up with the person that you sleep with, the fact is there's always going to be fallout. Well, God is saying, I want to spare you that fallout. And so some of you who maybe are toying with that relationship, see, here's the thing about these relationships. And this whole sermon is titled The Friend You Shouldn't Have. It's kind of interesting. In the midst of all the relationship series that we're doing, we're talking about the friend you shouldn't have. And the fact is, we don't ever go from lunch to bed, right, you guys? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that happens in between. And we live on all these different points, and we're making decisions at all these different points. But it moves fast if we don't pull back. And God is inviting you today to pull back. And some of you are maybe in a friendship or thinking about some things that maybe you shouldn't be. And God brought you here today because he wants to spare you that pain. But the last point is what I really want to camp on. Is that some of you are, I know, sitting here going, it's too late. It's too late. There's been too much fallout. And here's the good news about this passage. It is never too late. Even with all David did, still, at the end, he could come to the Lord, and there was grace, and there was forgiveness, and there was redemption. And the fact is, and the last one is, the greater the sin, the greater still God's grace. That God is always there to redeem. And as we know, this passage, this goes on. I mean, tragedy happened from this. From David and Bathsheba, Uriah dies. David and Bathsheba have a baby that dies. But the fact is, the Lord comes in and is able to redeem even then this story. Now, some of you, I just want to take a step back, and you're going, wait a minute. What about Uriah? Does anyone else feel that way? I know when I read this, I'm like, that poor guy. I mean, he did nothing but all the right things, and he ends up dead. How fair is that? Well, here's the amazing thing about God. Some of you may be Uriah here today, and you're living with the consequences of other people's bad decisions. Well, I'm here to tell you that God doesn't forget the truth. Now, what you know about this story is that David and Bathsheba, actually Bathsheba is brought in to be one of David's wives, and they end up having Solomon. And Solomon is part of the lineage of Christ. So this incredible story ends up in the redemption, that Bathsheba is one of 5 women listed in Matthew 1. Now, I'm going to invite you to turn there if you have your Bible, because I want you to see this with your eyes, and actually we'll have the verse up on the screen as well. But Bathsheba is one of 5 women in the Bible, but this is in Matthew 1, in the lineage of Jesus, and this names basically the whole lineage all the way up to Jesus Christ. But if you notice, in verse 5 and 6, I'm just going to read that to you. Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, another story of grace. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. Now listen to this. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Uriah is in the lineage of Jesus Christ, which tells us this morning that God does not forget truth. God sees your righteousness. God saw Uriah's righteousness. He's not even a Jew, and he is listed in part of the lineage of Jesus Christ because God didn't forget Uriah. God doesn't forget truth. But the thing I want you to leave with this morning is that he always leads with grace. So no matter how far you've gone, no matter what you've done, no matter what you're even thinking about doing, you have a God who loves you, who forgives you, and who is always ready to give you a new start. All we have to do is open our hearts to him. That's it. Invite him into your mess. That is it. He wants to be there. And even David, as far as he got, I mean, there was adultery, there was death, there was murder, there was all this stuff. And it wasn't too late for David. And it's not too late for you. Before we go to communion, I'm going to invite my hunk of a husband to come up here right now. And he's going to play a song. And it's an old song. Some of you remember Gary Chapman, who used to be married to Amy Grant, actually. Gary Chapman came out with this song. And it's really a song from the perspective of David, and how he comes to the Lord after this whole mess, and then opens his heart saying, I'm still a man after your own heart. And I wanted Jerry to sing this song because maybe that's where some of you are here today. And before we come to the table, I just want to give you a chance to let God in, to listen to the words of this song, and just be quiet with your own thoughts. This is just between you and God. And then I'll come back out and lead us in communion.
said, we all have a David story. The way that I got this song even is a David story. It was given to me by my ex-wife's father, who I just spoke to the other day, and that's part of that redemption story, is how close we are still. But it was what I tried to be in my first marriage to his daughter, was being Uriah. Anyway, this hopefully will speak to you. Oh God, Father in heaven and earth, and I call to you like deep calls to deep over water. Show me your endless measure of grace. Let tender mercy shine once again from your holy face. Deep in my soul there's a craving to please the one who has saved me. Oh God, though I have wandered so far, you know that I'm still a man after your own heart. I am driven by rivers of pride. You are my refuge, maker and keeper of my life. Lead me by the still waters again. Use me in spite of prodigal child that you know I am. Just as the deer runs through water, so does my soul to you, Father. Oh God, though I have fallen so far, you know that I'm still a man after your own heart. Just as the deer runs through water, so does my soul to you, Father. Oh God, though I have fallen so far, you know that